We've talked about redundancies, we've talked about employment contracts. Apprenticeships really are the lifeblood of our industry and the future of our industry. So what are some of the do's and don'ts of taking on an apprentice? Well, today we have the lovely Adisa Hasanovic, I said it right, who is going to be talking to us about those do's and don'ts. She's an industry training consultant with Apprenticeship Support Australia with over 10 years experience in the training and education sector. Apprenticeship Support Australia is focused on lifting apprenticeship commencement and completion rates through a provision of support at every stage of the employment cycle. So she's here today to give us the lowdown. Will you please welcome to the stage Adisa Hasanovic.
Good morning, guys. I won't take much of your time. I'm just going to go through some pointers and processes and I guess some things that we look out for or like to advise employers. Firstly, I'd like to thank Master Plumbers Association for inviting us, or for inviting me here to speak to advise you guys on the ins and outs of apprenticeships. Just really quickly, I'll give you a little bit of background on apprenticeship centres. Back in the 90s, apprenticeship centres were managed by the State Training Board, so the State Training Authority. And in the late 90s, what happened is the Commonwealth actually contracted administrative services to apprenticeship centres. So that's where apprenticeship centres, that's when apprenticeship centres were created. You've got about 5 apprenticeship centres in Victoria. Apprenticeships Support Australia is one of them, formerly known as Vecchi Apprenticeship Services, but they've obviously changed their name. Under the Commonwealth contract, we have 3 major services that we provide to employers and apprentices. Our first one is the registration process. So we're in charge of all the government contracts with relation to apprentices and trainees. We do that by completing what we call a sign-up, where we come out on site to see both parties and get both parties to adhere to or sign a training agreement. Our second major role is to pay any incentives available under the Commonwealth through the apprenticeship system. So all the money that comes from the Commonwealth to employers and apprentices comes through the apprenticeship centres. Our last responsibility under the apprenticeship program is basically mentoring and supporting the apprentices and employers through the duration of their apprenticeship, answering any questions, providing that training and support, mentoring and all that sort of stuff. This morning I'll just cover off a little bit more about the training agreement side of things and what happens once you hire an apprentice. We've talked about all other areas, but I think it's important for employers to know that the training contract registration, step is the most crucial step to when you hire an apprentice. Most employers obviously will know when they hire an apprentice they need to be on the government database for them to be recognised and for their time to start ticking away. So it's really important when we're talking to employers to let them know that once they hire an apprentice, if they're paying them apprentice rates, that they are obliged to sign them up as an apprentice from that time. Now, apprenticeship centres have regulations around how far back we can backdate contracts and training agreements. Under the Commonwealth currently, when we see employers, the maximum amount that we can backdate a training contract is 14 days. So essentially what we're saying to employers is within 14 days of employment, when you take on an apprentice, you want to be contacting a apprenticeship centre or network provider to come out and see you guys to do all the relevant paperwork. When we come out and see you guys, we go through bits and pieces and obviously grab details from either party and make sure that everyone understands their rights and responsibilities under the program. It's important to know that apprenticeship centres actually don't advise on pay rates or anything that's relevant to the industrial agreements. We do take on or grab the information as to what award that you respond to or pay under. We haven't got the authority to advise on anything else. So it's really important that you understand the award, specifically all the provisions that adhere to the apprentices and the pay rates that are related to apprentices, different provisions such as, training costs and all that and who reimburses the apprentices and all that sort of stuff. We do take the name of the award that you guys pay under or respond to, whether that be an EBA or a modern award. But very important that you do go through either Fair Work or your industrial membership commissions or other organisations that can advise you on what the provisions and pay rates and all that sort of stuff are. We do go and explain to the apprentices the same sort of things, and we also advise both parties that there is a regulatory body over the top that look over apprentices, apprenticeship centres and employers. The VRQA, I'm not sure how many of you have had dealings with the VRQA, but basically overlook the whole apprenticeship program. So they make sure that the network providers are doing the right thing, that the apprenticeship centres are doing the right thing, and likewise the employer and the apprentice are obviously adhering to the terms of the contract. Things like offering the employee or apprentice full-time employment, making sure that the adequate supervision's there, making sure that you're giving the apprentice time off the job to do all the TAFE components, and making sure that you're there for any support or mentoring that the apprentice may need. The VRQA also overlook basically the whole, the whole apprenticeship program, in that they can at any time come out to see both parties that are signatory to the training agreement, making sure that they are in that relevant the qualification, that what they're doing on the job matches to what they're studying, both in TAFE or off the job and in the workplace as well. Also on that, you will, when you sign up an apprentice, you will receive a formal letter from the VRQA once the apprenticeship centres have signed off on all the paperwork with the employer and the apprentice, stating their commencement date and their completion date. Now, that's very important for employers because basically that's how you pay the apprentice. So you'll find sometimes that some employers will find themselves in a situation where they'll say are looking for a second-year apprentice, and the apprenticeship centre comes out and they ask us, look, how much do I have to pay? Now, when you're taking on a second-year apprentice, it means that this apprentice has been registered elsewhere previously, whether that be interstate or in Victoria, and they have some time under their belt. The VRQA actually have databases that are shared with all the network providers for registrations in Victoria, and likewise the Commonwealth have databases for all the rest of the states, and that basically gives us an indication as to which apprentice has been registered and for how long. So based on that is how you determine what year that you will obviously pay your apprentice and what pay rates. In terms of our other services, I guess the incentives that are payable to employers, for those of you that have taken on apprentices in the last, 5 or 10 years, not much has changed. The government still offer the 4,000 standard incentives to employers, so that's broken down into 1,500 at the 6-month point and 2.5 at completion. They do have, or they have offering an additional incentive that came into effect from memory in about July 2015 for those employers hiring or looking at hiring an apprentice with what they consider mature age. For the purpose of the apprenticeship program, mature age is 25 or over, and apprentices that are in their first year and are hired at that age, the employer can potentially attract $4,000 on top of the standard incentives at the 12 months. Going back to the contract, basically when you sign the contract, obviously it's very important that you also have an employment contract in place and that you're meeting all the obligations under the award. But if it comes to a situation where you are either terminating or breaking that employment relationship, for the purpose of the apprenticeship centre, all that you're obliged to do is notify us once that break of employment happens. We cancel the registration, and it's really important for employers and apprentices to advise us, because what we do is we cancel that particular registration at the time that the employment ceases, and that will basically stop the time ticking for that apprentice. And then if they do move on, whether it be interstate or in Victoria with someone else, they can continue their time, and that time is registered to them. The cancellation process for us is just done by obviously a form that we get you guys to sign. with a date, and it's a mutually agreed date by both parties. Now, in the event, and very often we do get some employers and apprentices that can't agree on a cancellation date, or the employment has parted on bad terms, we do involve the VRQA to make sure that there's that independent body that comes in to see both parties, making sure that they walk away basically with a cancellation date to close the record. In the event that there is, in the building industry, there are times where jobs don't happen. There's a quiet time. You might see unforeseen circumstances where you won't be working, or you haven't got any jobs for the apprentice for, say, 6 months. That's fine as well. Under the apprenticeship program, you can what we call suspend an apprentice. A suspension basically means you're putting the apprenticeship on pause. So if the apprentice is happy to do that, when you suspend an apprentice, all that you're doing is, essentially what you're doing is stopping employment for the term for say 6 or 12 months, or however long you believe that it will happen. In that time, the apprenticeship contract is broken, so you're not adhering to any of the obligations under the training agreement. If and when the jobs pick up and the apprentice comes back and you're happy to recommence the apprenticeship contract, we then reinstate the contract, keeping in mind that the suspension period won't be taken into effect or won't be applied to the apprenticeship time. Look, that's basically all the contract side of things, and what you guys are, I guess, what to look out for when you're looking or signing up an apprentice, employing an apprentice. Additional to that, we do have the VRQA, or the State Training Board, have identified that the completion rate for apprenticeships in Victoria particularly are very low, and they've engaged apprenticeship centres in our last contract tender to mentor and support those apprentices. So they've identified areas of which I guess barriers to completion for apprentices, and we work with employers in identifying those. So a big one these days is mental health. And also living circumstances for young people, particularly those from the ages of 16 to 21. Apprenticeship centres now have the ability to have mentors and support networks for those people, whether that be for the employer and the apprentice, or just the apprentice, in that we make more regular contacts to the apprentice to make sure that, if there is any chance of hopefully in a ideal world, to overcome those barriers and see themselves to completion. Important to know, because it is a new initiative that the government have brought in the last tender, and we are hoping in the next tender that we're going to have something in the likes of the same sort of model, just to up those completion rates for apprentices. Now, pretty much for the contract side and for, I guess, my bit, I've covered off most of it, but I'm happy to take any questions from you guys, whether it be specific to your situation or just a general question relating to apprenticeships in plumbing or any other industry. Yeah, so what happens is when we come out to do our initial registration process, I know for myself, I sort of scope out and you can sort of get a gist of those apprentices particularly that need that extra support at the time of sign up. We also have what we call incidental mentoring support services. So say an apprentice calls me and says, hey, this has happened in my life, I'm having a tough time, and that's when we would get into gear and appoint someone. Basically, we can chat to the apprentice at that time, whether they'd prefer, say, phone contacts, or and we're conscious of the fact that they're on the work site and they've got a job to do, but even if it's after work or at some stage where we can support them. But yeah, at any time, as also at the start as well. Any other questions?
Can I just qualify one thing?
Sure.
And that was a mature age apprentice under in plumbing, under the award, is someone who's over
21, yep.
The incentive applies to when
the incentive applies to when they're over 25.
Yep.
But a mature age apprentice is someone who, when they first commence their apprenticeship, is over the age of 21. So.
Yep.
A lot of people will ring up and say, "Oh, we thought the mature age was over 25." That's not the case.
Yeah.
It's over
Yep.
21.
Yeah, and it's important to know, and that's why I did stress on 25 or over, because there is that difference that's within the award, and also the age of maturity from our perspective. So 21 for under the award. So the pay rates obviously vary from 21 or over, or change. But for the purpose of the incentive from the Commonwealth under the apprenticeship program, it's 25. So that's what they consider mature age. Any other question? Thank you.